One of the greatest obstacles to crafting health and wellness is identifying and controlling inflammation. It's at the core of all complex and chronic diseases, and it's the driving mechanism that underlies the most common symptoms that people like you struggle to overcome. Join us as we explore cutting-edge science and research to give you the information and tools you need to create the quality of life you want and deserve. And now, here is the host of Inflammation Nation, Dr. Stephen Noseworthy.
Hey there, and welcome back to the Inflammation Nation podcast. I'm Dr. Steve Noseworthy, your host, and we've been talking about obstacles to weight loss. We're in our third episode in this little mini-series, and if you've been listening to these in sequence or in order, you will remember that in the last episode, the main thing we talked about was this thing called the hypothalamic set point. And the hypothalamic set point basically is a memory that your body has for whatever your body weight is. And so if you end up having excess body fat and body weight for a long enough period of time, the internal intelligence of your body kind of resets what it defines as normal. And all of a sudden that becomes a standard that your body will defend, and it will resist particularly aggressive weight loss through severe calorie restriction and extreme exercise. It will resist that, which is why people tend to lose weight, and then as soon as they stop doing whatever it took to lose the weight, they just rebound back to what the body has known for a period of years. And again, we call this the hypothalamic set point. But at the end of the last episode, I shared with you that I have also struggled with weight over the years. Not that that has been like a perpetual issue or problem for me. So I thought that I would just take an episode to share some of that story with you. And I do that, I guess, just for the sake of transparency. And there is a part of me that doesn't want to share it because I'm not happy about it in my history, and I'm certainly not proud of it. But just sometimes hearing that someone else has gone through this and has come out the other side can be helpful. It can sometimes be inspiring and insightful. So this is really just kind of me as a person sharing with other people, and not necessarily talking as a clinician or, let's say a health expert, whatever that means these days. So let me just go back into this. So when I was young, I typically my normal body type is what they call an ectoendomorph, and tend to be on the lean side, on the skinny side. I was always a skinny kid. I was fairly tall for my age. I mean, I'm 6 feet tall-ish. I was just over 6 feet when I was in my younger years. I'm probably just a little bit under 6 feet at this point. But I remember I was an athlete in college. I played basketball and volleyball, started playing sports when I was in junior high school. I remember graduating high school at just over 6 feet tall, weighing 165 pounds, which is not a lot. And I do remember getting into college and eventually started lifting weights and putting on some muscle mass. And I got up to 175, 177 pounds and thought that I was huge and massive, which is kind of funny in retrospect. But I was an athlete. I played a lot of sports. I played competitive sports throughout the university circuit in Eastern Canada. If you didn't know that about me, I'm Canadian born and raised, but I've lived in the States, mostly in Florida, for over half my life. But back in the early 80s, I was invited to try out for the Canadian Olympic volleyball team. And that was the team that was going to the 84 Olympics. And it was very exciting to have been offered an invitation to a tryout camp. And so, and I say that not to toot my own horn, but just to kind of give you some evidence that I was at the time obviously fit enough and strong enough to compete in sports at the Olympic level. Now, it didn't turn out for me. I actually didn't make the team because the coach that was doing the training camp said that, hey, we like your potential, but to play your position, you need to be about 5 inches taller to play at the international level. So that's what it was. But what ended up happening was after that dream of going to the Olympics got squashed, so to speak, I was getting ready to graduate university. I started doing martial arts, but I also took to weightlifting and, just playing recreational sports, mostly, again, basketball and volleyball. And fast forward years later, I met my wife, Kathy. I was about 185 pounds at 6 feet tall, and I was very lean. I mean, I was athletic lean, all that kind of stuff. And she was a single mom with 2 kids. I was a single dad with 1. And so I went from being a single dad to a family of 5 overnight when we got married. And this is at a time when I was just beginning my career in chiropractic and in health. And took many years then before I got into what I'm doing now with functional medicine. But I just remember back at that time kind of feeling like I was in the prime of my life, right? I was lean and strong. I had a full 6-pack of abs. I could squat and deadlift around 400 pounds, which is more than average, but it's, I'm not going to wouldn't have won any strength competitions, certainly at that age. And then I discovered CrossFit in their early years, and I went through what would later become their level 1 trainer's course. And so like fitness and being athletic and all that, it was just kind of part of my DNA. I've always been athletically minded. And that doesn't mean everybody should, and certainly not everyone is. It's just kind of part of my backstory. But I was able to sustain healthy diet and exercise up until the point where Kathy got pregnant with our 5th child. So she had 2, I had 1 when we got together, and then we had 2 together after we got married. And when she was probably about 3 or 4 months pregnant with Chase, who was our youngest, life just got too complicated. It was too stressful. We were both too busy. Something had to give. I was working probably 60, 70 hours a day. I was not just a practicing clinician in the practice that I worked in Sarasota, Bradenton area. I was also the clinical director, which meant that I would work my clinical shift, and then I would spend probably another full day or the equivalent of that, just kind of in administrative and team building roles, because we were one of the first multidisciplinary clinics that showed up back in the the 90s, say, somewhere around there. And so what ended up happening was just life got too hard with everything, with 5 kids and work and career and all the things that we were responsible for. And so what changed was that I stopped going to the gym, like what happens with most people. I stopped playing sports. Not that I was playing a lot of sports at that point. Most of my activity was coming from chasing my kids around and then going to the gym on a frequent basis. And so I stopped working out, and after that, quite shortly after that, started to let my diet slip, started eating things that I typically wouldn't. And then things start to change. And the change started so slowly that I guess I didn't really notice. But in retrospect, like maybe I did realize that something was up when the first 10 pounds went on, and I had to loosen up my belt by a notch or so. And, we just kind of laughed it off and said, okay, this is the happy fat that everybody talks about, because we're very happy. Then one year, and this is years later, one of my old college friends came to town with his family, and we met them down on Siesta Key Beach in Sarasota for the day. And a few weeks later, I was going through some photos that we had taken that day. And there was this one picture of my friend Dave standing on the beach, and he was talking to some guy who was back onto the camera. And I looked at the guy, I'm like, who's the fat guy? I don't know who this guy is. And I started looking more closely, and I'm like, that's weird. This guy has the same swim trunks that I do. And then it dawned on me in like this moment of like horror that the fat guy was me. And I couldn't believe it. One of the things that amazed me in I guess it was that first year or so, and then even on until I got a handle on things, was how I could live my life every day and look at myself in the mirror, showering, getting dressed, whatever the case might be, and not see the condition that I had gotten in. And it was so radically different than how my life had been up until, several years before that moment. So I had gone from, at the time when everything changed and I stopped working out, I believe I was somewhere around 195 pounds, very strong, very lean. My wife says I was down somewhere around 6% body fat, something like that. Certainly enough to have a full 6-pack of abs, like I said earlier. And I went from that to somewhere over 240 pounds of being not so lean and not so strong anymore. And it seemed to me that honestly, I was so unhealthy at that point. And this was well before I got into what I'm doing now in functional medicine and all that kind of stuff. I remember at one point having blood work done, and the lab had to reject my sample because there was so much fat in my blood that they couldn't do any tests on it. And I was ashamed. I was I felt like a disgrace. I was emotional. I had all this psychological conflict because here, after all, I'm in the healthcare industry. How could I let myself go so much? And I was literally terrified that I was going to drop dead of a heart attack any moment. And I remember, maybe I'm sharing a little bit too much in this little story, but I remember quite literally laying in my wife's arms, bawling my eyes out in fear of dying suddenly and leaving her alone and leaving my 5 kids without a father. That's how much of an impact that change had on me. And so listen, I know all of the negative self-talk. I know and I understand that feeling of desperation that says, I need this off right now, and the faster the better. And that's what I did. Now, again, this was many years before I got into functional medicine and started learning what I know today, which obviously has taken me a decade and a half, almost 2 decades now, to get to the point where I know what I know now. But just like most people, when faced with that realization of, oh my gosh, I have to do something about this, I started to eat less and move more. I started going back to the gym fairly consistently. I ate a lot less. I cleaned up the content of my diet, and I went into, let's call it an aggressive caloric restriction, but it was still within the boundaries of what might be considered acceptable. It wasn't like severe calorie restriction, but it was enough that it should trigger weight loss. And I remember being so happy when I hit like 8 pounds of fat loss or weight loss. But then I remember that sense of deflation when the scale stopped changing and I tapped out at 8 pounds. It was like that first 8 pounds was so easy, then what happened? And I ended up going into this cycle where I would hit the gym, control my diet, lose, let's say, 8 pounds, and then I would stop, and then I wouldn't prioritize the gym. I'd rationalize I could, eat a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And not only would I gain the 8 pounds back that I had lost, I would quite often gain a couple of more. And so I would lose 8 and then gain 10. And my weight kept creeping up until I actually stopped weighing myself at 240 pounds. I just couldn't handle the emotional toll of seeing a number. In fact, it was 242 pounds was the last highest number that I saw. And I stopped weighing myself because I couldn't take it anymore. And, and that's a big departure from being 195 pounds and very, very lean, like athletically lean. And I remember that I actually refused to get on the scale again until I knew that I was going to see a number that was substantially lower than that 242. I had to wait until I had lost a couple inches off my waist, and I knew I had because I had to keep adjusting my belt, for example. I had to buy smaller pants, smaller sizes. And the first time I stepped on the scale, I was either 220 or 224, something like that. It was at least 20 pounds of weight loss before I convinced myself that it was okay mentally and emotionally for me to get back on the scale again. But, for me, the problem was that I had been heavy enough for long enough, even though it wasn't kind of like my nature to be a heavy person. I had been heavy enough and for long enough that my body resisted all of my best weight loss efforts. And through a process of success and failure, and then learning about functional medicine and metabolic priorities, it became very clear to me that the simple relationship of calories in and calories out is not the full story, which is obviously what this whole mini-series is about. And as I learned more about human metabolism and functional medicine, I started to apply it to myself. And one by one, I discovered and learned to manage or eliminate my own metabolic obstacles. And I'm just going to give you a couple, probably the ones that were the most significant for me. And I do so knowing that I run the risk of making you think that, well, this is where everyone needs to start. And that's not what I'm trying to communicate, because ultimately, what will happen in this mini-series is we'll end up with a list of metabolic obstacles that you should consider and investigate. It doesn't mean you're going to have all of them. For example, if I have a list of 5 things that pretty much everyone needs to consider or look at, somebody might struggle with 1 and 2, someone else might struggle with 3 and 5, somebody else might have a little bit of everything, and everyone's different, which is why there's no kind of common prescription other than having the right thought process, having the right perspective and mental framework that you can do some kind of a self-evaluation and give you some things to seek out on your own. But nevertheless, for me, what I discovered was that I had, even though I was eating a lot of wheat and dairy, which most North Americans do, I had a big issue with those. And so I was gluten sensitive. I had no idea until I stopped it, and dairy as well. And a whole bunch of things got better. And I had some other food sensitivities, but most of them were related to wheat and dairy. I had a problem with kind of like the pre-diabetes or the insulin metabolic syndrome or insulin resistance. I had a problem with controlling insulin. My body doesn't like carbohydrates. It tends to rebel, even though they taste great. And I had some issues with gut health that I had to sort out. And once I did that and regained control of my metabolic environment, then the whole calories in, calories out thing started to work. And that's one of my biggest messages in this particular mini-series, as well as a personal message between me and you, is that if you are struggling with weight loss and fat loss particularly, and you've tried the calories in, calories out thing, and you've done a fairly reasonable good job of that, if it hasn't worked, it's because you have metabolic obstacles. And for the calories in, calories out to work, you have to find those and either modify, control, or eliminate them. But, by this time, when I started to realize all of the things that needed for me that I needed to pay attention to, my priorities had started to change. I was no longer that, let's call it a frantic emotional mess, because that's what I was for a period of time. What I was looking for was not the rapid weight loss and not for the scale to read a certain number. What I was looking for was permanent fat loss. And in reality, what I was looking for was to win the long game. And so I had to separate myself from the desire to see the scale read something under 200. Like I kept saying to my wife, if I got back to 195, which is where I probably felt my best in my whole life. Of course, I was a lot younger then, but I had this psychological need to see a number that was less than 200, and I had to let go of that because, after all, I had learned and come to the realization that if I weighed 210, for example, but I had traded a bunch of fat for muscle, I would be physically smaller, my clothes would fit better, I would look leaner, stronger, healthier. I would be leaner, stronger, healthier, and it would be because I controlled my metabolic environment. And so I had to reframe my thought process about how important is the number on the scale to me, and what actually is most important to me. And so I realized that for me, what was going to serve me best through my future was going to be a short list of things. Right? I call it the long game. And number one is you have to have metabolic control. And this is what this whole discussion about metabolic obstacles is about. But I also wanted to have, I don't need to have a 6-pack of abs anymore. I'm just beyond that. Of course, I loved it when I had it, but I know I need to have a healthy level of body fat, particularly because I know for me metabolically, when I put on excess body fat, it tends to be hormonally and immunologically active. And if you listen to some of the episodes we've done before about body fat and inflammation, I think we even talked about this in our detox series, is that there are different types of body fat, and there are some people who have body fat that is not metabolically hormonally active and others do, and it's not a good thing. And so I want to have a healthy body fat level with adequate muscle mass and strength and functionality and conditioning to meet the demands of my life and my lifestyle, and have enough reserve left over to meet any emergencies that might arise. Like that to me is the long game, because what you don't want is you don't want to get to the point where you don't have enough left over to help out somebody else, whether that's physically, emotionally, or whatever the case might be. You certainly don't want to have such little capacity and health that you can't even take care of yourself. And I've said this before, that the most accurate predictor of aging independence is your global physical strength. Quite literally, your ability to get up and down off the couch, get up and down off a toilet, and not to be crass, but to reach around and wipe your own butt. Nobody wants to be that person as they get older that has to have somebody do those unmentionable things for them. What we want is to be in our 80s and our 90s, God willing, even higher than that, and to be that person that everybody talks about. Like, she's 97 years old and doesn't take any medications, or, still shopping for yourself. Let me tell you this story, because I think this will, and it's not necessarily just about weight loss. It's about this idea of the long game and being healthy for life and winning that long game. My wife and I travel around a lot. We have 5 kids. We have 7 grandchildren. One is on the way. And so we spend time going back and forth between my family here in Canada. I'm up here visiting my dad and my sister right now, and going around visiting our kids. And that doesn't mean like I'm retired or anything like that. I still work. I have my own clinical practice, but because my practice is virtual, I can be literally anywhere in the world and still take care of my people. But what it does mean is that we have the freedom to, visit my dad, my sister, or one of my sons who's up here in Canada. We have children in Florida, we have children in Texas, and we have children in South Carolina and Oklahoma. And so we were in Florida a while back. And usually when we're there for anywhere for a period of time, we'll join a local gym. We have stuff that we travel with that we can exercise with, but if we can get to a gym, we like to go to the gym environment. And so there was this older lady. My wife was telling me the story that one day she was in there and this lady was working out with a trainer, and she was just a wee bit thing, and she was trying to press 5-pound dumbbells over her head, and she was struggling. And 5 pounds in the big scheme of things is not all that much, but you might argue, well, for someone who's in their 70s, it's a lot. Well, maybe not, but for her it was. And she could hear the trainer encouraging this lady, saying, don't get frustrated. You just started doing this. I know that it's hard, but I promise you, if you stick to it and keep showing up and do the work, you're going to get stronger and things will get easier. And she kind of smiled, because she was like, that's a good trainer, because there's a lot of bad trainers out there who really just don't pay attention to their clients. But nevertheless, this guy was on point. And so I guess it was a few weeks later, something happened, and she struck up a conversation with this lady, and she wanted to encourage her, which she did. And part of that was showing her a picture of what she used to look like, meaning my wife. Because all those years that I was going through all of my struggles and had gained all the weight that I had gained, guess who was right there with me? They say misery loves company. Well, I'm not entirely convinced of that, because neither one of us really loved being overweight. Even though we were happy as a couple and as a family, we weren't happy with our physical state and our physical conditioning. But nevertheless, it happened. We both overcome that. And so she showed this lady a picture of what she used to look like. And the lady was just amazed. She's like, you changed that much? And she said, yes, and you can too. And so she went off and she was enthused and all that kind of stuff. I guess it was maybe a month later, they had a chance to chat again. And this lady was so excited, because the day before, this was the first time in years that she was able to carry a bag of groceries from her car to her house by herself. Now, wouldn't you think that whether you're 70 or 80 years old, you should be able to carry a 10-pound bag of groceries? Of course you should. But if you're not focused on where your current path might lead you, and the stark contrast between that ultimate endpoint and where you really want to be, whether that's 5 years from now or 50 years from now, it doesn't matter. The time to take control and plot your path to your ultimate goal is now. But a couple of words of warning: you can't let your emotionality, you can't let your shame, you can't let your fear, you can't let your sense of disappointment in yourself, you can't let all of that negativity and self-talk dissuade you from doing things the right way or compel you to do things the wrong way. And if I haven't been clear enough over these last couple of episodes, the wrong way to lose weight and be healthy is extreme dieting, extreme caloric restriction, excessive exercise, because you will regain your weight and you'll reduce your BMR. Now, let me add one thing to this, and I'm going to go back to, I mentioned this at the end of, towards the end, or somewhere in last episode, we talked about a study that was done and published in the Journal of Obesity in 2016, where they took 14 of the 16 participants in one of the early seasons of The Biggest Loser, and they measured their basal metabolic rate and, of course, their body weight and body fat and all of those things right after the 30-week season was done. And they followed them for 6 years, and they measured everything again 6 years later. And if you remember, if you missed that episode, or if you've never seen Biggest Loser, basically these contestants sign on for 30 weeks of training. They get isolated. They don't see their family. They can only have like supervised phone calls, something like once a week for short periods of time. Basically, the producers of the show remove all external influences, and they control their environment. They control where they live, where they sleep, who they interact with. They are on a severe low-calorie diet of about 800 calories per day, and they work out from 4 to 6 hours, 24 hours a day, every day. Not 24 hours a day, sorry. Every day of the week for that 30-week period of time. That is, it's extreme in the sense that no average person is going to commit to that. This is TV after all. It's theater, right? So you go to the extremes and you drive interest that way. But nobody's going to do that. Nobody's going to say, honey, I'm going to lose 100 pounds, so there's no competition or no TV show. I'm just going to move away from you and the kids for 30 weeks, and when I come back, I'll be a new man. Like, nobody's going to do that. People are going to go, I'm just going to cut my calories. I'm going to cut out this, cut out that. I'll start going to the gym. Maybe they're not metabolically healthy enough to do that. But nevertheless, let's go back to the study results. What they showed in that study is that after 6 years, it varied from person to person, but on average, of the 14 participants who went through the study, after 6 years, on average, they had regained 70% of the weight they had lost during the show. So if somebody had lost 100 pounds, 6 years later, 70 of those 100 pounds had come back. And on top of that, their basal metabolic rate, also called their resting metabolic rate, had gone down on average by about 500 calories per day, which is honestly the equivalent of the calories in a fairly robust meal that you might eat. And, to be honest, the math on this kind of stuff really doesn't work out. If we know ahead of time that extreme diets and extreme exercise results in rebound weight gain that lasts over 6 years, and on top of that, 6 years later, your metabolic rate is reduced by 500 calories per day, there's no way that you can win that game. It's going to be mathematically impossible. To put this into context, when I work out, if I work out for, I think I may have said this before, but at the risk of being redundant, let me say it again. I use my Apple iWatch to track my workouts. And if I go to the gym and I'm really, really focused and kind of hitting it hard, whether that is with lifting weights or cardio or some combination of functional body movements, whatever the case might be, I can easily burn 500-600 calories in a workout in an hour. And if I'm doing Olympic lifting, especially if I'm doing it in what we call a metabolic fashion, I can burn 900 calories. And so if you have somebody who goes on these extreme diets and exercise programs and they reduce their metabolic rate, and this is part of hypothalamic set point too, right? They reduce their basal metabolic rate by 500 calories, and then they return to eating maybe a normal maintenance calorie diet. They are immediately entering a state where they're in caloric excess, not because they're eating more than they should, because their metabolic rate has downregulated. We'll come back to these concepts periodically as we go through, but I just want you to be aware that your perspective matters, your framework and your focus matters. Your emotionality matters, but you have to not make decisions through that emotional lens. You have to be clear and focused. Like, what is it you're looking for? Do you just want the number on the scale to change? Well, great. Do an extreme diet and exercise too much. You'll lose a bunch of muscle, you'll lose some fat, and you'll weigh less, but you're not going to be any healthier. The proper way to do this is to look at permanent long-term weight loss that comes from improving your metabolic control, adding some muscle mass and functionality, and doing everything that you can to promote your ability to burn body fat and not just lose weight. It should be okay with you somewhere in your brain and your thought process to weigh more than you think you should if you got there by dropping fat and adding muscle. And I don't mean you have to be a bodybuilder. I don't mean that you have to, look all muscled out to the point where you don't even like looking at yourself in the mirror. I'm not talking about any of that. I'm just talking about being sensible and reasonable, being intentional, being patient, and doing things step by step the way that's going to allow you to win that long game. And that's what I want for you more than anything else. All right, so that's my story. I just wanted you to know that been there, done that. And if I can help you, that would be fantastic. All right, we're going to close it out here, and we'll talk to you again on the next episode. Thank you so much for listening to the Inflammation Nation. If you found this episode valuable, please rate, review, and subscribe to our podcast. Be the first to know when a new episode drops so that you can stay on top of your game. It also helps others like you find the answers they need. And why not head over to my main website, drnoseworthy.com, that's drnoseworthy.com, to explore my personalized functional medicine coaching programs, submit a question to the podcast, maybe take a quiz, or even reach out to me using the contact form that you can find there. We'll see you next time.